Hello, I'm Geeta Pensay and it's our last programme before the election. And in the region with the highest proportion of marginal seats in the country, your vote, it seems, really does count. Here to make the pitch for their parties, my guests are four people looking to become MPs for the first time. Alicia Kearns is the Conservative candidate for Rutland and Melton. Stuart Brady is standing for Labour in Loughborough. David Watts is the Lib Dem candidate in Newark. And Alan Graves is the Brexit Party candidate for Derby North. We'll also be hearing from the Green Party later in the show, so welcome to you all. And don't forget, you can get a full list of all the candidates standing where you live at bbc.co.uk/election. So just 4 days of campaigning left before the election, and there's been no let-up in the pace here in the East Midlands, with visits from Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn and Nigel Farage. Well, we're joined by our political editor, Tony Rowe. Tony, tell us about some developments overnight.
Well, we heard John McDonnell and Andrew Marr there talking about anti-Semitism and the Labour Party, and there's a story in today's Sunday Times where it talks about the speed with which Labour are addressing this. And one Labour member from Eastwood in Nottinghamshire comments on a Facebook page in his name, which were, "Jews represent a viral infection that need to be completely eliminated." He was expelled in August, but it took the party 10 months, according to the Sunday Times. Labour, though, say that new powers introduced by the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, means that people are expelled in weeks now rather than months. And that member himself, he says the page had been tampered with by Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, and he hadn't written the posts. Onto the Conservatives on anti-Semitism. Their candidate in Ashfield is being investigated by the party. Lee Anderson is an active member of a Facebook group where conspiracies about a Jewish philanthropist are being promoted. So the Conservatives investigating a candidate on anti-Semitism.
Very serious issue there. And Tony, 3 party leaders have been in the patch this week.
Yeah, we're an important region, and I think I've heard it said that with a road to Westminster runs through the East Midlands, and the Prime Minister was in the patch in Derbyshire on Thursday. He went round a knitwear factory there. He took questions from workers as well as journalists, and when I interviewed him, he seems to have committed the government to the electrification of the Midland Main Line. Jeremy Corbyn made a point of standing by Robin Hood in a stump speech in Nottingham, taking from the rich, giving to the poor. He said his personal #1 priority was tackling homeless rough sleeping. And Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party leader, was in Bolsover again, a Conservative target where the Brexit Party is standing. He refused to entertain the idea that in a marginal he could split the vote and help Labour win. And that's a decision which has upset the East Midlands Brexit Party MEP, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and others who've quit Brexit over this. They say it would be tragic if, by stopping the Conservatives gaining seats in these marginals, Brexit would be lost as a consequence if there was a hung parliament or a Labour government. OK,
Tony, lots to talk about there. Alicia Kearns, you know, we know that the East Midlands is a really important region for the Conservatives if you want to secure that majority. But as we've heard, when it comes to Labour seats, you face a real battle where the Brexit Party is standing, potentially taking that Brexit vote.
You're completely right, and with respect, I think it's a deep shame that the Brexit Party is still standing in these key seats, because I voted to leave. You know, I want to make sure we're the only party that has a deal ready to go. We just want to get it voted through. Anywhere on the doorsteps in the East Midlands that I've been campaigning, people just say, get it done. Even if they were voted Remain, they said, I'm a Democrat, get it done. So I am worried that it's going to take some votes, but I'm hoping people will see we have a deal ready. They want the deal. So let's get that deal voted, back Conservatives, and I hope that's a message that really rings through to people.
Alan Graves, you know, we have heard about one of your MEPs, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, quitting over this issue just this week. What do you say to those, like Alicia here, who believe that you should stand down in those seats?
Well, there's 2 issues. First of all, there are 130 seats across the country that Labour have won, and the Conservatives have never won those seats. So therefore, they're never going to win, ever. I mean, in Derby South, for instance, it's been won by Labour for the last 69 years. They're not going to change those. Secondly, it's important that to know that there's a lot of Conservative candidates that are Remainers. All right, that is what the Boris has had a problem with, is the fact that they've got Remainers in their party. And that is why, for the last 3.5 years, the Conservatives have never taken us over the line for Brexit.
Except for the fact that every single Conservative candidate across the country said they will vote through this deal.
And they said that said that in 2017. In 2015, before the referendum, every single one of these parties said that they would honour the referendum, and they haven't, and they didn't.
OK, and Stuart, Brady, is this Labour's best hope, in a way, because the opposition is so divided, to keep those Labour seats?
Well, it's bizarre, isn't it? Because Nigel Farage said that the deal wasn't Brexit, and therefore he was going to stand up against it. Then at the 11th hour, he stood his candidates back in Conservative-held seats from 2017. But now we seem to have the Brexit party kind of saying the deal's OK, but also standing by that previous position where the deal wasn't OK. The truth is, after 3 years, when I speak to people across the region, I say to them, well, we're going to have a referendum and you'll have the chance to vote in or out in that referendum. And the really important message is, because the Brexit party have done this deal with the Tories, the really important message is tactical voting in order to get that referendum, because the people's vote and Best for Britain are recommending to vote Labour in most of the marginal seats in this country, in this region, in order to get that vote.
That have put country before party.
And David, what do you make of this?
Farage before anything else.
And your party has refused to, is going to renege on the 2016 referendum.
What is being offered now is nothing that was being promised in 2016. In 2016, it was £350 million a week for the NHS. It was the easiest trade deal in history. It will be all done over a weekend. That was exactly what Nigel Farage was saying. Stop trying to rewrite history.
The people of this country voted to leave the European Union.
What was being promised was not what is being delivered.
And you are changing that. You want to revoke Article 50 and you want to keep us back in the European Union.
What was being offered then is not what is being offered now, and so it is absolutely right that people should have a choice.
OK, and Tony, some have said that this has been a real election of promises. What would you say, having been out there?
Well, yeah, a lot of promises. I've spoken to a lot of people. I think I've done my own canvassing for 6 hours, some of which you'll see later, and a lot of people said they just didn't believe all the things that were being promised. I mean, an example of that, this week I interviewed Boris Johnson, and in the course of the interview, he revealed that, yes, they were going to electrify the Midland Main Line, which wasn't in the manifesto. So in an interview, we managed to change government policy, change Conservative policy, and it just seems like promises are being made to try and entice people to vote. And I don't think the electorate are going to sort of accept all those promises as going to be fact.
I mean, with that example, Alicia, can you actually afford to electrify the Midland Main Line? Are these just promises that are coming out of thin air?
I think it's absolutely right that we listen to voters, and if they're saying to us, actually, we want you to electrify, we need you to be doing this, the manifesto didn't have this, consider it, we should. The Labour Party have introduced new things this week as well. We are absolutely a party that wants to listen to voters, and that's what we're going to do, and we're going to make sure the Midlands isn't forgotten, because people talk about the North and the South divide. The Midlands is the engine powerhouse of the country, and I know I'm going to stand up for the Midlands, and I know our party will.
Well, it's interesting you're mentioning the North-South divide, because we'll be coming to that in a moment. Well, we've heard from our politicians. Time now to hear from the voters with some direct questions for them. This week, our colleagues at Radio Nottingham held a special hustings event for young people. Throughout this election, we've been concentrating on the power of the number 10. And so we got some of the audience from the night to take seat number 10 in the auditorium and pose their questions directly to our panel today, starting with Nicole Skinner, who's a student.
What will you and your party do to ensure that the North-South divide doesn't grow any bigger?
Stuart, so we've got the North-South divide here that we're talking about. In terms of visits this week, Boris Johnson did make a concession as we were talking about more investment in infrastructure here in the Midlands. Is that enough?
Well, the electorate in the East Midlands will have to judge this government on 9 years of failure to invest in the East Midlands, because on a lot of the tables about investment across the country, the East Midlands comes bottom. And the Midland Main Line electrification, which you mentioned earlier, is really instructive, because actually that was planned and then it got scrapped by the Tories. So I wouldn't believe them on this, because it wasn't budgeted for in their initial manifesto. We've got big plans for the East Midlands through our East Midlands manifesto. And the problem with East Midlands is there used to be good jobs here with good pay, and a lot of that's gone. Pay's gone down, work's been casualised, people haven't had a pay rise for 10 years. Economic growth has been too focused on London and the South East. there is a plan for good jobs in our region through massive investment, and that's a Labour plan. So I would say judge the Tories on their record of investment or failure to invest in the East Midlands and judge us on our ambitious plans for the East Midlands.
OK, David Watts, would the Lib Dems boost spending in the East Midlands when it comes to investment?
Absolutely, and it's absolutely right what you said about the Midland Main Line. We had the commitment for that in the past, and it was the Conservatives who took it away. What we've announced today, in fact, is a £50 billion programme of investment outside of London and the South East, because far too much of our spending is concentrated as a country in one area, and the rest of us lose out as a result. I am deeply worried that the Conservatives, should they get in again, would then scrap HS2. That would cut us off from easy access to the South East, and that would really exacerbate the problem that we currently have. So we have a planned, budgeted, fully costed programme of £50 billion of investment outside of the South East, specifically to stop that gap growing.
And Alan Graves, what would the Brexit Party do in terms of that north-south gap that Nicole is talking about?
Well, again, there's two things about the north-south divide, and one is the Westminster bubble have stopped Brexit going through, but secondly, they've ignored the Midlands. For the last 20 years, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have both ignored the Midlands. We want to invest £200 billion into the regions, which includes the Midlands, but also further north as well, and that's where we can do that by scrapping HS2, because there's a lot of people in Derby and Derbyshire that will not benefit from HS2. It's a vanity project that has been created for the rich people from London.
Alicia, Kearns, a lot of points raised there. I mean, this week in Jeremy Corbyn's visit, he did say that the East Midlands comes bottom of the pile for government investment. And, you know, he does have a point. New figures out this week show that, yet again, the region gets the lowest funding per head for transport. You know, what are you planning on to address this?
So one of the things I want to personally fundamentally do is completely change how we fund county councils across this country, how we fund local government. There's actually something called the Leicestershire model, which is a really sensible model which essentially looks at what services are actually needed by communities, how much does it cost to provide them, takes into account things like deprivation, but adds in things like rural areas, as we have much across the East of Midlands, looking at how much more does it cost to deliver in rural areas. So that's something I personally want to do. But, you know, these things can't be delivered. We have a 4-day week. No one really believes that a 4-day week will work. You know, you can't invest in the East Midlands if you have a 4-day week. And the Lib Dems are going to fund it based on stealing your democratic right, stealing the fact that people voted to leave. You know, these are not things that they can deliver on, and it's absolutely not right that we compromise democracy so that people can promise that they're going to take back money or keep money from the EU. It's just not right. OK, thank you all very much. Well, let's take another question from our young voters. This time it's Billy Watson.
In 2019, climate change is a big issue, but what's more important, facing climate change or strengthening the economy?
Well, before we hear from our studio guests, let's hear from the Green Party on this. They've got their highest ever number of candidates standing across the East Midlands. Here's one of them, Kat BOETTGE.
Our target is having zero carbon by 2030, and that is the most ambitious and necessary target. People are increasingly worried about the climate catastrophe we are facing. We need to work with our neighbours to fight climate change and for other issues. So a vote for the Green Party is a vote for Europe. Without the planet, we haven't got an economy. We were happy to bail out the banks for over £100 billion. Now we are facing the biggest crisis ever. We need to prioritise that. This is our livelihood. Climate change is really the biggest threat humanity's ever seen. So vote Green to fight climate crisis.
OK, David Watts, there's a good question here. What's more important, the environment or the economy?
It's not actually an either or, they're both important. The reality is, as Kat just said, we have a climate crisis, and if we don't tackle that, there's no point doing anything else, because we will be in such a mess that nothing else will matter. So we absolutely have to get the climate right, which is why, again, we've proposed a massive investment in tackling the climate crisis. But you can actually do that in such a way as it boosts the economy, it doesn't harm it. So it's a both, not an either or.
Alan Graves, the Brexit Party isn't necessarily known for its environmental policies. Is that fair? Would the economy take priority?
Ita, it's not fair, you know that. the thing is, I think both issues are very, very important. They rely on each other. Without a good economy, it's very difficult to tackle climate change and vice versa. What we've promised to do is plant 1 million new trees. We are very climate aware, and we want to make sure that, that they both go in hand. Having said that, the economy is also extremely important. We've just heard about the East Midlands being under-resourced. We need to resource the East Midlands first, and then, and alongside that, we can then also plant these 1 million trees, and we can help with the climate change.
Stuart, Brady, Labour have talked about this real radical move, a green industrial revolution, with a £400 billion fund to pay for it, £400 billion. Is that realistic?
Well, actually, it's 250 billion over 10 years. It is realistic, and we think there is a climate emergency. That's why we led efforts in Parliament to declare a climate emergency in May of this year. Friends of the Earth, yesterday, released their analysis of all the manifestos, including the Green Party, and they said the Labour Party's manifesto was best for the environment and climate change. So I think we're in a really good place here. We have got ambitious investment plans. Across the East Midlands, there are renewable power companies, there are car manufacturers, so we're going to build those electric car plants, we're going to invest in the renewable power industry, because we think this is an emergency, and there will be economic benefits to the region in better jobs and better pay.
OK, and Alicia, Kearns, what do you make of Billy's question? You know, how do you strike the balance between the economy and the environment?
And I agree, it's not an either or, but I'd say judge us on our record. So since 2010, we've got about 1,000 people into work every single day, which is an enormous achievement. But alongside that, we've decarbonised faster than any other G20 country. We've reduced greenhouse gases by 25%. We're getting rid of fracking. We've got more electricity coming from renewables. You know, these are good things we're doing. Can we do more? Yes. But, you know, the Conservatives are the party of the countryside. We are the party of the environment, and we're pragmatists. We're not going to intervene in people's individual lives and say, well, you can't live your life like this, or you can't get on planes, or so on and so on. We're going to make sure we have a green economy, and we've invested in green SMEs. We're investing in the green economy, and we're going to keep doing so.
So you shut down so much of the renewable stuff that was being done between 2010 and 2015. You pulled all the funding from it, and we saw a huge number of SMEs that were invested in green businesses just going to the wall as a result of Tory policies.
We have more energy coming from renewables than ever before, more offshore wind than ever before. We are investing in this, and we had weeks last year where we ran without any coal powering our energy. So the facts show that we are doing it and we are delivering.
The Friends of the Earth study I referred to had the Conservatives in a very, very distant bottom place, I have to say, because their plans are not ambitious enough, because this is an emergency, but their plans simply do not treat it like an emergency.
Our plans will be delivered, and we are delivering them, and we've shown we can deliver them. So you can be sure that we will continue to do so. They're not pot-high ideas based on
We have ambitious plans. The IMF, the OECD have said our investment plans are fully within the realms of what is affordable and acceptable for this country. And the East Midlands needs investment because it's suffered for too long. OK, all right, thank you very much. Well, let's get back out on the campaign trail now. Last week, we heard from voters in Mansfield, a strong Brexit-supporting seat. But what about people living in a Remain area? In Rushcliffe in Nottinghamshire, 58% voted to stay in the EU. Traditionally, it's a solid Conservative seat, but with the party's endlessly repeated slogan, "Get Brexit Done," you may just have heard them using it. How are they feeling now? Tony's been finding out.
Central Avenue in West Bridgford, well lit here before a 3-hour trek begins around some of the darkened streets. Here in Rushcliffe, people voted more strongly than anywhere else in the East Midlands to remain in the European Union. How is that going to affect the way they vote in this general election? It's so dark, only opening doors illuminate the streets when someone shines a light on their opinions. A lawyer who felt so strongly about the Prime Minister's attempt to suspend Parliament joined a political party and came out into the street to tell us.
I joined the Labour Party because I was so upset by the actions of Boris Johnson, who closed down Parliament so he could act as a dictator.
It can't be easy for the canvassers to persuade people on a winter's night to open the doors, letting their heat out and the political hot air in. One Remain voter told me they couldn't vote Conservative. They've had a leaflet through the door from the Liberal Democrats, but they can't vote for them because of their record on tuition fees. So they'll be voting for Labour. I spoke to voters worried about things other than Brexit, the NHS, support for disabled people, and one woman said it's distressing to see so many homeless on the streets and she wouldn't mind paying a bit more tax. Conservative voters who voted to remain in the EU here, they say, well, it was a democratic decision and the country has to act on that, which is why they're sticking with the Conservatives. One told me that he wasn't the biggest fan of Boris Johnson, but he was a lot better than the alternative of Jeremy Corbyn, who he said would be a disaster for the country. Some think Labour's promised a bit too much and nationalisations will take us back to the 1970s. Since 1970, this has been a Conservative seat. Ken Clarke has retired and has told the BBC he doesn't know which way he's going to vote. We found in his old seat, he's not the only one.
Well, Tony's back with us. And Tony, another night there where you've been out in the cold, dark streets chatting to voters. Now, you have been covering the election period for the last 4 weeks. What's your sense at the moment of where the electorate is at here in the East Midlands?
Well, I've been covering general elections since the Thatcher-Kinnock era, and this is the one election where I've found so many people who, so close to polling day, are still got to make their minds up in some seats, and that's quite remarkable. And so I'm afraid for the four of you, you've probably got to go and knock on doors for a bit longer to try and get people to make their mind up, because that is quite striking about this election. In individual seats, there are people who don't know yet.
And Alicia, Kearns, you know, for the Conservatives, you do face this sense of indecision for a lot of people who just, you know, don't know which way to go. How much of a challenge is that this time round?
I think the important thing is, as a Conservative, I'm first and foremost a Democrat. And you know, if we look at Rushcliffe, Ruth voted Remain, but she believes that we should be delivering on the referendum because that's what people asked for. And actually, Ken has said that people should vote for Ruth. He has gone out and said that that's what he wants. He's given her his endorsement. But yes, it's our job as politicians, not just during election time, to go out on the doorstep and say, what matters to you? What should we be working on? What do you want as manifesto changes? What did you like from the manifesto? What could we be doing for you day after day? And if we're not doing that in and out of election time, then we can't be serving people that we want to represent.
OK, and Stuart Brady, I mean, we heard there about Rushcliffe, Conservatives who are willing to vote elsewhere because of their feelings about Remain. But Tony also went to Mansfield, where he found Labour voters considering voting Conservatives because of Brexit. So, you know, you're really fighting for these votes with people who don't know who to believe in.
Well, we're facing a Farage-Boris alliance of Brexit and the Tories. So it's important that voters realise that they need to use their votes smartly in order to get that referendum. And most people think the referendum is completely uncontroversial because if they want to vote out, they can vote out. If they want to vote in, they can vote in. And after 3 years, we know a lot more about Brexit. But the key message has to be to many of these undecided voters, use your vote smartly. That's why the People's Vote and Get Britain and Best for Britain are recommending Labour votes in most of the marginals across this region, because if you want that referendum, you've got to vote for Labour in the marginals of the East Midlands.
I think there's something slightly offensive about telling people to vote tactically. People should vote. People are smart. Voters know what they want and what they don't want. They can review things, they can look at the case being put to them, and they can decide what they think is best for them, their friends and their family. That's what people have to decide, and not when they, you know, things like, oh, well, the referendum, this and that. You know, giving EU nationals the vote. Brexiteers...
I'm sorry. But that's
David Watts, yes.
Yeah. The problem is that we have such a poor voting system that a lot of the time people are actually voting against what they don't want rather than for what they do. Now, Rushcliffe's a classic example. We have an excellent candidate there in Jason Billing, and we've really made the case for Remain in that seat. So people who are lifelong Conservatives have been saying over and over again, we're voting Lib Dem this time, because for once we can actually vote for something we believe in, not having to just vote against Labour or against Tories like many others have done.
Alan Grace, there has been a lot around tactical voting, conversations about tactical voting. Where does the Brexit Party stand on that?
Well, this is the problem. I mean, we have the two major parties here, Conservatives and Labour, both telling people to vote for the least worst option rather than voting for the best choice. And obviously, for Brexit, what we've got in Parliament at the moment is we have a Remain Parliament, and what we really need is a Brexit Parliament. And so where we have Brexit Party candidates, people really ought to vote for the Brexit Party to get Brexit over the line.
OK, well...
But Brexit aren't going to win any seats seats, so that's just a completely wasted vote.
You two agree, don't you, on the electoral system?
Yes,
don't
yeah.
you?
Proportional representation is very important for our country. We need to give people the choice of who to vote for. And if you have a proportional representation system, they will have that choice and they'll be confident that they'll actually get some candidates.
I have a lot of sympathy with these arguments about the electoral system, but we have the electoral system that we have. And Alicia can take the moral high ground, but they've done a grubby deal with Farage, and that's why I should...
Zero deal.
They've done a grubby deal with Farage on the Brexit.
I'm really sorry, that's just not the case.
Hence, you can take that moral high ground. The reality is, if we want to fight back against that, we need to think tactically about how we use our votes in this region.
The least worst option again.
OK, all right. And Tony, can I just bring you in? Because, you know, we are in these last few days now before polling day. What do we expect to see here?
Well, I expect to see the Conservatives try to blitz the so-called red wall, as it's being called, in the East Midlands, which would be seats like Bassetlaw, Chesterfield, Ashfield and Bolsover. And I think Labour too will be trying to win seats, dare I say it, in like Loughborough, which are seen as marginals. So everything to play for still in
everything
those seats.
To play for. Thank you so much, Tony. And just a reminder, there are full details of all the candidates standing in Rushcliffe and across the region at bbc.co.uk/election. Well, just before we go, let's take a last question from one of our young voters, and maybe we can end on a note of unity, because Alicia Jador is looking for advice from our guests.
If I wanted to become a candidate, what advice would you give me?
So, Alicia Kearns, what advice would you give Alicia?
I'd say to Alicia, find an issue you're passionate about, go out there, work hard on it, campaign on it, you know, find out if it really is kind of community service and civic duty that drives you. And then if you can do something in your community that's made a change, that's what people want to see in their candidates, people who believe in community and the power of change. And actually then go and maybe do an internship. Don't work in politics. I think we want MPs who bring real world experience like I do. But, you know, go and help, volunteer, knock on doors. I'm happy to hear from if you want to come knock on doors with me over the next few days.
Stuart Brady?
Well, I was glad to see that Alicia was an actress. I started off as a professional rugby player and did various jobs in climate change trade and then became a barrister. And I think a diversity of experience is really, really important. So my advice to Alicia would be stay away from politics for a while, get some real life experience and then bring that to bear in the political domain.
David Watts, would you agree?
I agree, yeah. Being in the real world is vitally important. I think all of us here aren't professional politicians, but find the party that most represents what you believe in, look at them all, decide which one is closest to you. You probably won't find a perfect fit because we all have some disagreements. Join it and get involved.
OK, and Alan Graves, what would be your...
I agree with quite a lot of these things that the other candidates have said. At the end of the day, it's important to believe in something. If you believe in something, then follow your heart. In this election, you need to follow your heart. If you believe that Brexit is something that's important to you, you should follow that. If you believe Remain is, then you should vote for this chap here.
Thank you very much, Anna Graves. And that's all for this week. My thanks to my guests. We'll be back next week with a full breakdown of who's won and who's lost here and what it means for the East Midlands. See you on the other side. Bye.